Indonesian investigators have successfully downloaded information from the flight data recorder of the Sriwijaya Airjet that crashed into the sea last week. Flight SJ182 crashed into the Java Sea minutes after takeoff from Jakarta. The 26-year-old Boeing 737-500 went down on the 9th of January with 62 people on board on the 9th of January and was destroyed. The aviation industry in surrounding countries has also suffered other flight catastrophes, including flight MH17 and MH370. Speaking to us about the crash and the industry in the region is Dr. Guy Leitch. Dr. Guy Leitch, thank you for your time and thank you for joining us on Weekend Dawn, Channel 405. My question is, this region seems to be troubled. I mentioned flight MH17 and MH370 and now this flight. What is the issue with the planes in that region?
Yeah, Jacob, nice to be with you. Well, the issue is quite simply twofold. There is, on the one hand, massive growth within the Indonesian airline industry. I was looking at the stats recently for Sriwijaya. The Indonesian industry has grown from 96 million to 26 million to 94 million in just 3 years, passengers. That was up to pre-COVID. So it's had a really heavy growth. And at the same time, the regulators and the whole safety management systems have just not been able to keep up. So quite frankly, it is one of the more dangerous places in the world to fly. It is a very similar situation that Africa faced about 7 or 8 years ago.
Let's talk about this specific crash now, Guy. Given the rainy conditions that were taking place on the 9th of January, could that have played a role in the incident that took place?
Yeah, I'm afraid I don't have a good answer to that question at this stage. It is still a little early in the process. Yes, it's good news that they've managed to download the flight data recorder, but as far as I know at this stage, they haven't yet found the other so-called black box, which is the cockpit voice recorder, which will tell us what the pilots were saying to each other, which gives a lot more indication as to what actually may have happened on that flight. Look, there are some things that I think we need to establish up front. One of the most important is that this is not another Boeing MAX crash. This is an old aircraft, and indeed the entire flight profile was very different. It had got to 10,000 feet before it literally did, as the general media likes to say, a nosedive. It literally powered straight down into the water. Why it did that, I'm afraid at this stage, I don't think anyone is even hazarding a guess, let alone having any firm answers to.
So we've mentioned that it's an older model. Will that also play a critical role? Does that mean that some older models are not maintained correctly?
Well, you hit the nail on the head. Older aircraft are not essentially or in any way less safe than newer aircraft. In fact, in the light of the MAX accidents, you could say that older aircraft are more tried and tested and proven and known. The new aircraft should be safer. But the whole question relates about about maintenance then. Is the maintenance up to speed? Were there any problems with that? Just locally in South Africa, we've seen a few worrying signs of maintenance problems creeping into Fly Saffair with pressurization problems and engine shutdowns. This is stuff that just goes back to the intensity of the what's called safety management systems, SMS, which has to be vigorously applied by the regulator, in our case here, the Civil Aviation Authority, which exists all around the world. But there are worldwide systems in place that airlines can adopt to give their passengers the comfort that they are indeed meeting world standards.
And talking about meeting world standards, where does South Africa stand in aviation safety compared to the rest of the world?
We're right up there at the top. We haven't had any single jet aircraft fatality on South African soil ever. That's a fascinating and very reassuring statistic. We do have the comfort of knowing that we have a really strong regulator in place who has shown a willingness to ground airlines often on a relatively small issue. And thus we've seen pretty much all the airlines having been grounded at one time or another for maintenance-related issues mostly. So the South African traveling public can have a lot of confidence that our airlines are not like the Indonesian airlines.
Guy, I think I want to go back to this flight that I mentioned in my intro, flight MH370. What is the current status of that? Did they ever find any of the black boxes or the debris that was affiliated to flight MH370? It's been years now.
It's been years. It's going to remain one of the great mysteries of aviation. Look, I think that we can take informed guesses as to what actually happened to it. The consensus of opinion now is that one of the pilots used it to commit suicide, but they're all on board. He deliberately flew a profile to avoid the Malaysian radar returns. In other words, he descended, he flew under the radar, quite literally, out into the Indian Ocean. And then probably turned left and headed southwest into that vast empty patch until the fuel ran out and they just crashed. And no one knows where. So no, nothing has been recovered other than those few bits of floating debris that were recovered off Madagascar and the coasts of KZN and so on. So there's absolutely no firm answers to that one. It must be a real burden to bear for both the airline and, of course, those who've lost all their loved ones on that huge Boeing 777.
I mean, that's an incident that went as far back as the year 2014. I know I myself was a young budding journalist when I read about that story. It's surprising to see that it actually never ended. The fact that it all culminated to something that never actually ended. My question then becomes, what's next for an airline? How do they bring back their reputation if something like this happens?
Well, yeah, I mean, you could probably write a case study on Malaysians' handling of MH370. They did all the obvious things. They changed the name of the airline. They took it back into full state ownership. So they gave the traveling public assurance that it couldn't happen again. But of course, it wasn't just MH370 that Malaysian had to bear the brunt of, as it were. They also lost that 777 that was shot down over Belarus. And those were within a year of each other. So it really was an airline that had a most tragic period. But it has, thanks to state support, managed to come through it. And I don't think many people these days choose not to fly on Malaysian simply because of the two previous losses.
In conclusion, Guy, what is the importance of the black box, and what can we expect to come out of the black box of this recent crash in Jakarta?
Yeah, well, the black boxes are absolutely essential. They're actually two, and they're orange. And the one black box is the flight data recorder. That records as many as 300 different parameters of what the aircraft is actually doing, where the control positions are the flaps set, what the power, what the engines are doing, what their temperatures are, what their output is, what the fuel burn is. All of those sort of things are data that is carried by the flight data recorder. And that is enormously important to accident investigation because it tells what the controls are doing. The second is the cockpit voice recorder, and as the name says, it records the voices in the cockpit. So if the one pilot turns to the other and says, "Oh, we've got a problem here," the investigators could find out exactly what the problem was as the pilots had actually seen it and responded to each other. So between those two things, it enables accident investigators to form an extremely accurate view of what actually happened in the accident. And I'm very confident that the cockpit voice recorder will be recovered as well, because this is not a difficult recovery. I believe the aircraft is lying in about 75 meters of water in a very tight, compacted area because of the very high rate of descent and vertical vector of its crash. So I think it's another day or two before the cockpit voice recorder is recovered. At this stage, it's less than a month after the accident. So both of these flight data recorders or black boxes are actually pinging. They're sending little signals to say, this is where we are. So I think they'll be found, and I think we will get to the bottom of this accident pretty quickly.
The black boxes full of answers. Guy Leitch, thank you for your time. Aviation expert, unpacking the dynamics surrounding the Indonesian plane crash, which crashed into the Java Sea minutes after takeoff.